Good morning, afternoon, or evening, folks, and welcome to Cast of All Trades, the show where we talk about developing skills, exploring ideas, and following curiosity. I'm your host, Orion Siebert, and in this episode, I share my thoughts on the idea of success, specifically exploring the question, what does it mean to live a successful life? How do people define success? Does your culture or spiritual belief play into your views on success? And do we ourselves know what we consider to be a successful life? I will attempt to answer all these questions and more in the coming episode. This is a new style of episode for me, and one that I hope I can continue doing more into the future. I'm well known amongst my friends and family for asking really good and insightful, deep questions, stuff that a lot of people maybe think about a bit by bit, but stuff that can really shape the way that you view life as a whole. So I'm hoping that I can continue to explore questions like these, and if that's something that interests you, then subscribe to the show so that you don't miss out on more insightful questions such as these, and my in-depth analysis on questions such as this. Alright, enough dilly-dallying. Without further ado, what does it mean to live a successful life? What does it mean to live a successful life? This is a very multifaceted question, and the answer is going to differ from person to person no matter who you ask. Sure, you're likely to get a number of similar responses depending on the type of person you ask, but in general, everyone has their own view on what it means to live a successful life. So how can we even start with this? Is there any way we can find a universal answer to a quote-unquote successful life? Well, let's try taking a piece of advice from Charlie Munger that if you want to succeed at something, first learn how to fail and then do the exact opposite. That said, it's also a little hard to decide what does it mean to be a failure at life. Some people will often throw the insult of you are a failure to try to degrade or demoralize someone, but at the same time, a failure at what? Oftentimes when people are told that you are failing at life, they're describing certain aspects of life that one might be failing at. For example, if someone is striving to get a job, but they've been unable to find a position, perhaps they're failing at their professional career. Or perhaps someone is trying to achieve some new fitness goal of theirs, but they keep backsliding and they aren't able to make much progress into it. Is that what it means to be a failure at life, that you keep on trying something but you never quite succeed, or you keep on backsliding? Perhaps, maybe, that's just one view. But even looking at this through the lens of what does it mean to be a failure and trying to work backwards from there doesn't give us a whole lot to work with. So let's take another step back. What are the most common metrics that people use to measure life success? I'm going to go over these one by one and try to explain or come up with some ideas of why do people consider these to be measures of life success. So the first and probably the most obvious one is that a lot of people measure life success by wealth or total net worth at the end of their life. Wealth and total net worth is a very nice round number and easy metric to figure out for most people. Why? Because you can determine it by looking at your bank account number. How much money is in your bank account? How much is your house worth? How much is your car's worth? Generally, this is a pretty common way that people like to measure the success of their life, because it is a quantifiable number that they can see and that they can compare against other people to say, oh, I am further ahead compared to my friend Bill, and I'm a little bit behind my friend John, so therefore I am more successful than Bill, but less successful than John. I think that's why people like using the idea of wealth or total net worth as a measure of success in life. But also, there's something that comes along with having a lot of wealth, or having some amount of total net worth. And that's typically that you get some sort of luxuries from it. People like the idea of, or they think that once you have a lot of money, that means that you have some amount of set luxuries that you can never go without again, that you will always have this thing to you, and that your quality of life will increase dramatically. And in some cases it does, but for some cases it really doesn't. So that's why I think a lot of people consider net worth or total wealth to be one measure of a successful life. Another measure, kind of along a similar lines, is job title or position within an organization. This, instead of just tackling the monetary status of someone, it's targeting the status within an organization or relative to other people. So I'll dig into this a little bit more later, but people like to know where they stand in an organization or where they stand in a group. And the higher up you are in that group or organization, the higher status you are, might determine how successful you are or how successful you consider yourself to be within that group or within that setting. So once again, it's another pretty easy metric to see. How many people do I have above me? How many people do I have below me? And it's a good way to tell relative to everyone else where you stand in comparison to them. If you are the number one person at a company, if you're the CEO or the CFO or whatever, then you know that there's not much higher I can get from here. Maybe if I wanted to go higher, I would go over to another company and be the CEO or CFO or whatever for that company instead. But there's always a way that you can tell where you stand relative to everyone else in the company if you're going based on job title or position. And that level of status, that's another metric that some people like to use to determine life success. It's a pretty common one. Along a similar lines is career progression, and where this differs slightly from job title or position within an organization, career progression might be more along the lines of someone trying to develop a certain set of skills to go along with their career, or perhaps it's career competency is a better way to put this, where someone might consider their life to be very successful if they're the secretary at a organization and have been for the past 60 years, but they feel very successful in that place because they know everything that goes on there. They are the master of their career. They know everything, and they are very difficult to replace, or they're basically irreplaceable because they've gotten to the point that they're so proficient at the thing that they do that they just can't be outdone by anyone else. It is a certain level of progression that maybe doesn't increase with job title or job status within or relative to other people with different jobs in an organization, but it's more like a relative level of career progression or perhaps a career status within the same job title amongst a similar group. So, for example, let's go with the secretary thing again, where you may have been a secretary for a much longer period of time in an organization. Someone new comes on, you know that their status in that organization lies below yours because you have been there longer, you know the career better, you are better suited to do the thing because you have more information, more knowledge, you have progressed further down that career line. So once again, it's a measure of status compared to those around you. Next is looking at personal income, and this is once again similar to job title and wealth, where it's a very easy quantifiable metric to see where how much money do I make every year or every month or every hour, whatever metric you want to say. How much money do I make over X period of time? And people can use that to say, how valuable is my time or how valuable is my life based on a numeric metric, where they can very easily say, okay, I make $15 an hour, therefore my my life expectancy is worth however long I expect to live, multiplied by the number of hours that I have in my day, multiplied by that $15 per hour, and that therefore will technically lead you to a value of your life, quote unquote, if you were to never make any more progression again, if you were to never get an income boost or anything like that. It's pretty similar to the idea of wealth or total net worth, because you have a fixed number that you can see. You can tell yourself, okay, if I want to be more successful in life, I have to increase this number, and if this number goes up, therefore the value of my life also goes up. And a lot of people will associate monetary value with the success of their life. So once again, it's similar to the idea of wealth being the total, like being the level of success or the measure of success in one's life, but on a more, I guess, pulled back perspective, perhaps, or maybe it's even a protracted perspective. Because if you're young and you have like a high income, then your potential income over a longer period of time is technically higher than the person who is old but has quite a bit of wealth. So I don't know, maybe that didn't come out quite right, but think of it as two sides of the same coin, where wealth might be one way to measure the success in one's life through money, and personal income is another way to measure life success through money. Moving on to the next step, let's step away from just like careers and money and look at some other potential metrics. Another metric is community status, and I couldn't quite figure out a way to phrase this properly, so I think community status is going to be the closest I can really get it to. This is wholeheartedly going to depend on the communities that you personally care about. Let's tie this back to the job title or position within a company or organization, for example. For community status, that's basically the same thing for community status, where you choose an organization or something you care about in the community that you want to be, like, that you can see how high up in it are you. It could be as simple as I am the president of the parent student teacher board meeting thing, the PTA or whatever you want to call it. I don't remember what the acronym stands for. That could be a piece of community status to say, yes, I'm contributing back to my community. I have a lot of status in this community for the work I've done. Therefore, my life has been much more successful compared to those who have not contributed back to this community. So that's just another way of measuring life success. And it doesn't just have to be in a community sense like the community that you're around. It could also be within a religious organization where how high up in the religious organization did you get? Do you have, did you reach the standards of a priest, a bishop, or a high leader of some sort? For some people, that could be a measure of life success. Did I attain a certain level of, did I attain a certain position within an organization that I work in or that I care about, such as a nonprofit organization, such as a volunteer organization, such as a religion, such as, there's plenty of organizations or plenty of groups you could choose from, or plenty of communities you could choose from to say, my placement in this community is going to partially determines the measure of my life success. And it doesn't even have to be an official community of sorts, where if people naturally turn to you in a setting to say, yes, if you have a question, go talk to Orion about this because he's the best person to talk to about this thing. Guess what? In that community, I might have some sort of status at that point, and that might become a measure of life success for me because I've reached a point where people recognize that if they have a problem, that they talk to me, that I have gained some sort of leadership status, even in an unofficial setting. So community status is another way that some people like to measure life success. Moving on, there's the idea of accomplishments measuring life success, such as how many medals have you won in a sports profession that you do, or what's the quality of those medals that you've won. Winning a gold medal at a little league soccer tournament is probably not going to mean nearly as much to you as winning a gold medal on an Olympic stage would. And sometimes those accomplishments that people base their life success on, where they'll say, I have worked very hard to get to this point to be able to earn this piece, to be able to earn this medal. And it'll almost become like the accomplishments they make, the medals they win, the tournaments they win, the things that they do, almost become symbolic of saying, look at the success I've had in my life. Here's the physical, tangible proof of it. So that's another example of it. This is something that I'll typically see amongst people who are really dedicated into sports, but not just people who are dedicated into sports. For example, I could probably consider myself to be personally more tied to having accomplishments measuring life success, because I like making things. My form of accomplishments might not be going out and winning a tournament. It might be I completed a project I worked so hard on for a very long time. I know that I felt very, very accomplished when I made my first musical instrument. I made a crappy electric violin. It looked like a piece of garbage, but it worked. And it broke a couple times, but I was able to fix it up time and time again. And eventually, it finally worked. It was a fully functional electric violin, and that was an accomplishment for me. Therefore, that may contribute to my view of life success, or be a measure of life success on me, of how many accomplishments did I do and how great are those accomplishments. So there's a few different ways you could look at this idea of accomplishments being directly tied to or directly correlated to the idea of measuring your life success. In a similar vein to that, we have perhaps people measure life success in terms of their competencies, or how talented or skilled or what sort of knowledge they've accumulated over time. Tying back to accomplishments for a second, one other thing that I might touch on is, aside from just the sports world, there's also the academic world, where people might tie accomplishments to, say, winning a Nobel Prize or winning some sort of great academic thing, getting a PhD, or how high academically they've made it. It's similar to the community status one, but it's a much more pigeonholed, narrowed group that you're looking at, because people who will earn a PhD will typically be high status in very niche communities, where they'll say, yes, I am a specialist in this one very niche thing about biology, about like a very specific kind of microorganism. And amongst certain biologists, that person will be very high status. Or amongst certain disciplines, that person will be very high status. Okay, so now leaving accomplishments behind, let's go back down to competencies. Some people determine the measure of their life based on how many talents they've collected, how many skills they've collected, the knowledge that they've gained over the years, and sort of that culmination of what are the things that I can do and what are the things I know how to do? How smart am I? Sort of all of this. It's a little harder for me to quantify this, to say like the number of talents or the number of skills that someone has can be used to measure life success, but well, no, maybe it's not hard to quantify it, but it's a little hard to find a proper example of it. I know that I personally tout the idea of being a jack of all trades is better than being a master of one. So perhaps it's people sort of like me who have this mentality of pick up a bunch of skills, learn how to do a bunch of things that that say, yes, the more things that you know in life, the more things that you can do physically, the better. And it's not just limited to certain professional skill sets, but perhaps also including interesting physical skill sets, such as learning how to do gymnastics or learning how to do martial arts or sort of physical mastery. That could be an example of an extra competency that maybe, well, it doesn't have anything to do with professional success or professional skills. It's still something that could contribute to your measure of personal life success. And yeah, it's a little hard for me to dig into competencies as a measure of life success, but it is something that I have seen, and you know it when you see it. When someone is basing the value of their life based on the things that they can do, then that's a pretty good idea of that person is measuring their life based on the competencies and the skills that they have, which totally fair. If that's what they want to do, that's what they want to do. Okay, we're going to do another little transition to sort of the last group of four that's sort of related. So the last group of four of measures of life success that I feel like are pretty well related, and I've seen a lot of as well, is the next one I want to touch on is measuring your life based on happiness. Now, this is once again a very vague and very fluffy term that people will use to say, if I have lived a happy life, I've lived a successful life. Okay, but what does that mean? Does that mean that you are living a hedonistic lifestyle that says, every given moment I have doses of dopamine and serotonin, and so much of that boosting through my brain because I'm kicking back on the beach, sipping Mai Tais every day, and doing whatever, where I'm happiest in the moment every single day? Or is that a reflection of my life, the measure of my life success is based on happiness in the long run or happiness in retrospect, where perhaps you may not like doing the thing now, but you know down the line that when you look back on doing the thing, you're going to be happy that you did it, or you're going to be satisfied, or something like that. So even with this idea of using happiness to measure life success, we still have a number of things that we can look at there, a number of variables to say, are we measuring happiness based on the here and now happiness of life success? Or are we measuring happiness based on the retrospective value of happiness? So even then, happiness is a very vague and fluffy term that we could use to possibly measure life success. It doesn't make it any less valid than all the other ones. It just makes it a little harder to really dig into. Next is the mental and physical health aspects of measuring life success, where if you live a physically healthy life where your body is maintained for a long period of time and you feel physically well and you feel mentally well, for some people, that's the way that they measure life success. They say, do I feel good personally? Yes, no. Okay, that's what they do. And that's sort of, I guess, where I'll leave it, because I could try to dig more into it, but honestly, I wasn't sure what else I was going to say about that. Okay, last two. These two I see one of them much more common than the other, and yet they're both very interesting ideas, where one I actually recently talked about on an episode with Charles Mace about relationships and therapy, is the quality of your relationships, using that as a way to measure your life success, where people will say that oh, what's the quality of your relationships will determine the quality of your life, which, okay, that can be very true. Perhaps that is perhaps that is the best way to measure the quality of your life, where if you have good people all around you, if you have good relationships with your family, with your friends, with your loved ones, perhaps that's a good way to measure your life success. Perhaps it's you giving back to those people, or it's, I don't know, it's hard for me to, once again, this is another sort of fluffy topic that can be very hard to really quantify. Is the quality of relationships determined by how many relationships you have, or is it determined by the depth of it? Is a factor of breadth versus depth, where can you get the same quality of life or the same life success by having 50 million somewhat loose acquaintances, or can you get it that's the same value for having one super deep friend that knows and understands everything about you? So yeah, it's kind of another interesting sort of fluffy measure of life success, similar to happiness in some ways. Finally, we have measuring your life success based on maximizing your personal potential. And once again, this is a very subjective, very I don't even know how I want to say it. It's a very hard topic to discuss, because there's a quote that comes to mind for me that that I don't even I'm going to fail this quote so horribly, but the quote is roughly, hell is when you get to the end of your life and you see the person you could have been compared to the person you are. And this idea of comparing who you are versus who you could have been, where the idea of success is how close did you get to attaining that could have been potential. It's an interesting idea, but you're never going to know who what that maximum personal potential could be, and maximum personal potential in what aspects of your life. So once again, this is a very fluffy, kind of hard to quantify measure of life success. So clearly there's a lot of different ways that you can measure the success of your life. So what are we going to do from here? How can we take these possible metrics of success and break it down to say, which of these really matter? How are we going to determine for ourselves what it means to live a successful life? As I was thinking about this question, I thought, okay, maybe I shouldn't just keep this to myself. Maybe I should go out and ask other people. How do other people define success? And as I was thinking about that, another question came to mind of, are there things that inherently shapes our worldview of success? So diving into those two questions, first, I took to Facebook to see what the Facebook moms had to say about success, because no one else responds to my questions on Facebook aside from the Facebook moms. So there we go. Thank you, world. So here are some of the ideas, some of the thoughts they had to share on what it means to live a successful life. One of them responded with a Churchill quote: "You make a life by what you get, but you make a living by what you give." Sort of giving this idea of, it's just from this quote, I'm reminded of perhaps they base their life success on the quality of relationships and community status, or what they give back to community. Another one responded with being at peace with life decisions and helping others. I'm just going to rapid fire through a bunch of these real quick. One of them mentioned sharing. Another one mentioned fulfilling your heartfelt dreams and desires and accomplishing your goals. Relationships with friends and family. Following one's chosen faith, and achieving one's purpose. A wide range of relationships. Living a life you're quote-unquote proud of. And leaving the world quote-unquote a bit better because I existed in it. So while these are all interesting ideas, I feel like they didn't give me too much to work on. Like, okay, these are all interesting. A lot of them are tying back to family and relationships and accomplishing goals, which, sure, that's good and all. But I think to myself, okay, this is a very small subset of people. Is there a reason that these people are saying what they're saying? And I'm thinking to myself, who are these people? Well, they're the Facebook moms. Of course they're going to care about relationships with friends and family, because they have friends and family that they really care about, and that's what they're spending their life doing. Many of them are dedicating a lot of their time to the communities of their choice, where perhaps it's not community status, quote unquote, that is driving them and giving them a life success, but it's the quality of the relationships that they build within those communities. So as I read through this, I'm thinking about who are the people that are responding with these messages. I'm reminded that it's heavily what someone decides is their life success is going to heavily base on their life circumstances. And what's one better way of seeing what someone's life circumstances are but by looking at the culture they were raised in? So that brought up the question of, does worldview and does circumstance influence how we view life success? So I started going through a couple different cultures and a couple different theologies, a couple different religions to see how do these things impact how people see success in living a successful life. So I only picked a couple different countries and a couple different religions. I could have gone much more in depth, but I want to keep this a bit shorter and keep it flowing a bit better. So first of all, USA. What are some of the qualities that are sort of commonalities between people in the US that say this is what it means to live a successful life? From what I found, a lot of them will say it means that you were a hard worker, that you were resourceful, that you had a high sense of achievement, and that you were very personally responsible. So the US is very much an individualistic society where they say your life success is entirely dependent on you and what you do. Therefore, to be able to have a successful life, you have to work hard, you have to be resourceful, and you have to achieve something. That's some of the commonalities I found in the US. What about New Zealand? New Zealand, a much more kick back, relaxed sort of place. And you can see that in their view on living a successful life. The two commonalities that I mostly found were, one, leading a meaningful and rewarding life, and two, relationships with others. And you can see that generally with the mentality or a lot of the culture down in New Zealand, that people are very much more laid back, kind of relaxed. And it's when you're there, it is kind of the place that you want to know your neighbors, that it's very, very community driven, at least from what I've seen and from what I understand. Finally, I want to look at some of the East Asian countries, since we looked a bit at Western countries in the US and New Zealand. What about the more Eastern-minded countries, such as Japan, China, South Korea, since that's a very different worldview compared to many Western ideas. And you can see that in their definition of success. So what do many of these countries define as living a successful life? Financial achievement is for sure one of the biggest drivers of success in many of these countries. Status, in particular, status when it comes to career progression or in terms of political power, and status even at the cost of one's personal life. And third, when you look at many of these East Asian cultures, you notice that there's one big commonality between them, and that is that you are meant to benefit the collective over the individual, that these are very collectivist societies, much different compared to the US and many Western nations that are considered more individualistic societies. So in the US, it's your personal responsibility, and everything you do will lead to your personal life success. And that is, like any personal gain, that leads to life success in Western countries. However, in Eastern countries, giving back to the community, building up the collective, that is what's considered a more successful life, even personally, because you know that your life contributed to building up other people much more. So that's what I found really interesting, that there's definitely a divide between success in Eastern cultures and Western cultures. And I'm sure that even if you looked north and south, that you could see similar differences from culture to culture on how they view success. So clearly, where you were born, where you were raised, the kinds of people that you were raised around, the cultures that you were in, that does play a role in how you see success. So what about theology? Does religion have a role to play in defining a successful life? Well, I'll say absolutely it does. So I'm going to go through 4 different religions that I briefly looked into or have had experience with to say, what do these religions consider to be a successful life? So for Mormonism, or for being a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, here's the rough life path that you're given to say, if you do this, you live a successful life. You are born into a house with a mother and father. You go to church. You go to church every Sunday, raised in primary, taught to live the doctrine and follow the prophet of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. When you turn 8, you get baptized. I'm going off of the male perspective. When you turn, I want to say it's 12 or 14. I don't really remember anymore. But when you turn a certain age, I'm going to guess 14, you get the priesthood. You work your way up through the priesthood. You start off as a deacon, then become a teacher, then become a priest. You attend seminary. You go and you serve a mission. You come back. You get married. You get sealed in the temple. You have kids, and you push them through the process again. That is their like view of life success, where you follow the teachings of the church, you follow the prophet, you do whatever they say, and that is what I've seen mostly as they considered this is what it means to live a successful life, to be the perfect Mormon. Okay, that's one way to go. It works for some people. It's a horrible way to live for many others. Okay, what about Buddhism? It's a very different religion or spiritual practice than Mormonism. In Buddhism, I have less experience with this, but I did do some Buddhist studies to try to learn a bit more about it. But one commonality that I've seen across many different Buddhist teachings is that to live a successful life typically means that you have attained inner peace and a form of mental well-being. So, yeah, take that what you will, but it's very much a inner practice as opposed to Mormonism's very much like physical practice of every day you go do this thing, you listen to the prophet, you follow these commandments, you do XYZ things. When I look at Mormonism compared to Buddhism, Buddhism is very much a introspective practice, where Mormonism is a very extrospective practice. I don't think that's a word, but it is now. Where in Mormonism, it's often how people perceive you, or at least that's what a lot of the Mormon culture pushes on people. Whereas Buddhism is very much about solving things from the inside out, where you're figuring things out from yourself, thinking through your way through things, and trying to come to some sort of inner peace, however you may want to do that. Another religion I wanted to look at, some people may call it a cult, is Scientology. I didn't look too deep into this. I just did a quick search on what do Scientologists believe as their successful life plan. And from what I've seen, the definition of living a successful life, according to Scientology, means achieving one's full purpose, preferably through the doctrines, the tools, the methods of Scientology, but it is achieving one's full potential. So that ties again back to that big list of common metrics that we use to measure a successful life, of community status, of how high up an organization can you work. Since we all know this, Scientology has many, many levels, and there are even some levels that are hidden to the members that if they don't look hard enough, they won't actually see it. And there's maximizing one's personal potential. So yeah, take of that what you will. But Scientology has its own way of doing things, different from Mormonism, from Mormons, and from Buddhists. And what about Islam? This is the last one I want to touch on. Once again, I don't personally have much experience with Islam, with the Muslim community, but something I'm interested in and want to learn more about. So from digging into some of the Islamic scriptures and seeing what do they think is the definition of living a successful life, here's some of what I found, where success is determined by one's actions, where Muslims are encouraged to pursue worldly success so long as it doesn't distract from spiritual goals. And pulling a scripture from the Quran, I want to say it's chapter 3, verse 185. I have it written down here, so I don't want to mess it up. And whosoever is removed away from the fire and admitted to paradise, he indeed is successful. So looking at this, the views of Islam seem to differ somewhat from the views of many other Judeo-Christian sects, or whatever you want to call them, denominations, because many other Judeo-Christian sects or denominations will often talk about worldly success being adverse to or being against spiritual success, or attaining spiritual enlightenment, where many people will often quote that greed is money is the root of all evil, greed is bad, yada yada yada. But in Islam, it seems that many of them will actually encourage and say, yes, please go out and pursue worldly success, go out and try to achieve these things, but do so in a way that doesn't interfere with our spiritual goals and our spiritual practices, where they try to integrate both the worldly and the spiritual. So clearly, this is not a super in-depth look at success according to theology. I don't have much experience with many of these religions, even though I personally enjoy looking into and learning about different religions and spiritual organizations. This is very much a cursory glance at it, but even with this cursory glance, you can see that different organizations, different religions, different places, they're all going to have their own different definitions of what it means to live a successful life. So where do we go from here? What else can we say about living a successful life? Is there anything that we can really dig down into that can perhaps direct us in some common way? That's what I was thinking when I was reminded of an interesting psychological principle that might have some answers to some of the things I've been thinking about. And that idea is the concept of stated versus revealed preferences. Now, you might be thinking, Orion, what does stated and revealed preferences have anything to do with life success? Well, here's what I'm thinking. Perhaps when asked directly about what does it mean to live a successful life, people will say one thing, but then they will actively pursue another. A good example of this is in the dating scene, where culturally many people will say that like body positivity and that fat people or people that are overweight are attractive. Like there's a lot of that being pushed in media, and people will say, ah, yes, like that. Well, that person who is definitely overweight is attractive. They'll say that to please many people. However, when you look at their revealed preferences of who are they actually going out and dating, you'll see that they're not dating the overweight people, they're dating the physically fit and healthy people. So that's sort of the idea that I'm getting at of perhaps when looking at the idea of living a successful life, don't look at what people are saying, look at what they're doing. So I can't really do that here on a podcast since the entire thing is literally me stating things as opposed to me revealing things of what do I actually do. But it's just an interesting concept that started bouncing around in my head. Then somewhat related to that is looking at the idea of observed versus hidden metrics, or the idea of placing the cart before the horse. A good example of this is that many people will say that that a successful life is one where you're like as happy as much as possible. But looking at that, what are some things that people will do in the name of happiness? Many people who strive for happiness or personal fulfillment or freedom, whatever you want to call it, many of them will sacrifice time, health, happiness, or relationships in return for money, even though we pursued money for the sake of time, health, happiness, and relationships. I have two story examples of this that I'd like to go over. One of them is a story that I call Climbing the Ladder, where it's a story about a businessman who starts off entry-level employee at this company, and over the years he works his way up in the firm. He gets good at the job. He climbs the corporate ladder. He gets pay raise after pay raise after pay raise until many years later, he's standing at the top of this corporation as the CEO, and he walks into the boardroom. He sits down and he says this: I don't have a relationship with my family. My son won't talk to me. My wife won't talk to me. My kids don't know me. I don't know them. And this is a problem now. The board members there are looking at him and said, why does that matter? We're not here to talk about your family. We're here to talk about the business. And the businessman reflects and he thinks to himself, why did I climb this ladder? People were pushing him to climb the corporate ladder because that's what he was taught, was the idea, well, that's what he was taught. This is what you do to be successful. And he climbed the corporate ladder, but in doing so, he lost his relationship with his family, lost his relationship with his wife, with his sons, with his friends, with his loved ones, with everyone around him. He got very good at climbing this one ladder, only to realize when he hit the top that he was climbing it, like the ladder was pushed up against the wrong wall. So what does this story really tell us? And this story talks a bit about observed versus hidden metrics, where perhaps he wasn't intentionally doing this, but the hidden metric that he wanted was quality of relationships with friends and family. The observed metric that he could get was paycheck, was salary, was social status, was career position. So he sacrificed the hidden metrics of family, friends, happiness, relationships for the observed metrics of income, money, wealth, social status, company status. That's just one example of hidden versus observed metrics and climbing the wrong ladders, or perhaps climbing the ladder against the wrong wall. Another similar story is the parable of the Mexican fisherman. A Mexican fisherman is out on his boat and he comes back in for the day. And standing on shore is a U.S. businessman. The businessman asks the fisherman about what he does all day. The fisherman explains, well, I go fish a little bit in the morning, come back, drink a glass of wine, play with my grandkids, and then sit around the campfire with my friends in the evenings. The businessman says, oh, well, you're doing this all wrong. Let me tell you how you should be doing it. First, you should take that small fishing boat, and you should go and fish all day. Then once you save up enough money from fishing all day, you should go and buy a bigger boat. The Mexican fisherman says, oh, what then? The businessman responds saying, Then with that bigger boat, you can go out and fish more and collect more fish and make even more money. Then you'll have a whole fleet of boats that can go fishing for you. The fisherman asks, then what? The businessman responds, then you'll have other people controlling the fleets for you, and then you'll go up to the US and you'll start your own great fishing company, and you can have a great IPO and make a bunch of money that way. The fisherman then says, and then what? And the businessman says, and then you'll sell out of all of it, and you can come back down to Mexico, where you can go fishing in the mornings, drink a glass of wine, play with the grandkids, and sit around the campfire with friends in the evening. The whole point of this story is to point out the flaws in many people's logic, saying that sometimes the successful life is one that you're already living, where am I doing the things that I want to be doing? The fisherman just wanted to go fishing in the morning, drink a glass of wine in the afternoon, play with his grandkids, and sit around the campfire with his friends in the evening. However, the US businessman said, no, you shouldn't be doing that now. Now you should be working hard and making a bunch of money and going out and doing this thing so that later you can come back and do this thing that you're already doing. And it's blending this idea of cultural differences and this idea of hidden versus observed metrics, where the fisherman knew his hidden metrics that he wanted to care about. He cared about his relationships with his family and his friends. The businessman, on the other hand, cared more about the observed metrics of wanting the money, wanting the status, wanting to grow, wanting to do the things, as opposed to the fisherman who already knew what he wanted. And even going deeper into that, when you consider what it means to be happy, you can have people who are uber successful, extra rich, and oftentimes when you look at the people who are super financially successful, super financially rich, and you look at their personal lives, you can look at them and see, oh, that person may be super well financially off, but their personal life is horrible. Warren Buffett is a great example of this, where financially he's the investor guy that everyone talks about because he is probably one of the best investors in history. However, look at his personal life, look at his relationships, and you find out that, oh, he doesn't have really good relationships. He sacrificed the hidden metrics of family relationships, friends, and whatnot for the observed metrics of money, income, investment growth, etc. Was that the wrong way to play? Maybe, maybe not. Is that the game that he wanted to play? Maybe, maybe not. But it's a choice that he decided to make. He said, I value money over the relationships that I have with my family and my friends. Everyone has their own rules for success. Everyone will say, this is what I believe to be successful. Maybe that's what they really think. Maybe it's not. Look at what they say versus what they do. But what are some things that are going to keep us from being successful at anything? There are a couple different ideas that I had coming up with this. This is ultimately coming back to the idea from the beginning that said, what does it mean to fail at life? What's some advice from Charlie Munger that says, if you want to succeed, learn how to fail and then do the exact opposite? So what are some things that we're doing that are really sabotaging our chances of success, whatever we define that success to be? So now that we have a good baseline of success, what are going to be the things that take away from that success? So one such thing is moving the goalposts. And a great example of this that I'm pretty sure all of us have experienced is the line, I will be happy when blank. Think about that for a second. I will be happy when blank. I'm pretty sure we've all said these words and we say, I'll be happy when I get this, when I accomplish this thing, when I do this thing. And yet you are still not happy in some way, shape, or form. Or you might not be satisfied in certain ways. And when you think about that, you realize, oh, happiness or success in some metrics may just be a simple choice of me saying, I am happy at this thing, or I am successful at this thing, and calling it that. Because in the past, we have already accomplished things that we've said will make us happy when we accomplish those things. So, moving the goalposts. If you can move the goalposts tactically, and say, I have accomplished this thing, I am proud of it, I am successful at it, but I want to do more. It's like, okay, good. First acknowledge that you've succeeded and that you've done the thing already. You can say, great, let's move on to the next thing, but remember that I already did succeed at this one thing. So that's That's one way that we are already sabotaging ourselves when we move the goalposts without keeping in mind that we've already accomplished many great things, that it's often just a choice. And in a similar vein to that is turning successes into failures. For example, for people who are trying to diet or trying to exercise, they may say, "Oh, yeah, I exercised one day now, but I should have done it sooner." Therefore, they turn their success into a failure. Or they say, "Awesome, I exercised today. I'm going to do this the rest of the week." Like, okay, one, sure, be proud of yourself first, because yes, you did the thing that you wanted to do, but take it one day at a time, because if you set your goals out too far, too fast, you're going to sabotage yourself. Aside from moving the goalposts, what are some other ways that we can cause ourselves to be quote unquote failures at life? This one is entirely about perception, and it's the idea of comparison is the thief of joy, where we look at social media and compare our lives to what we see on social media. We say, "Oh, I am a total failure at life because I look at what other people are posting on there and my life is horrible compared to theirs." Well, guess what? They're often posting the very best of what's going on in their lives, and you're comparing that to the very worst of what's going on in your life. Or you think, "Oh, this picture they're posting, that's their everyday, that's like what they do all the time." And then comparing that to your everyday, which is get up, go to work, come home, watch Netflix, go to sleep, repeat. This is entirely just keeping up with the Joneses, where you're looking at what other people are doing and you're thinking to yourself, "Oh, I can't do that," or "They're so much better than me." And it's this idea of, I have to now improve my life to try to keep up with theirs or to try to best them or be better than them. This idea of comparison is actually a double-edged sword, where I talked about earlier that comparison is one of the main metrics used for determining a successful life. Where are you in standing compared to other people? Do you have more money than other people? Are you at a higher job position than other people? Do you make more income? Community status-wise, are you ahead of people? Do you have more accomplishments? Do you have better accomplishments? Do you have more relationships? Do you have more skills that you can use? Yada, yada, yada. Comparison is a double-edged sword, because you can compare yourself in a good way to say, I am ahead of other people, I feel proud of myself, I feel like I'm successful. Or you can compare yourself in a bad way to say, I'm behind other people, I feel bad about myself, I'm a failure at life. There's this interesting statistic that I just had to find a way to bring it up, but the happiest man in a group of men is the one who thinks he's getting a little more sex than everyone else in the group. The guy who's the happiest is the one who perceives he's ahead of others. Notice there that it's not reality, it's the one who perceives he's ahead of others. It doesn't matter what everyone else thinks. If you think you're ahead of other people, then you feel like you're better than everyone else. You think that you have some biological thing in there that says, "Ah, yes, I perceive that I'm ahead of other people. I feel better than other people. I feel like I'm a success." So, keeping all of this in mind, wrapping this up, what does it mean to live a successful life? And of course, it's the horrible answer that everyone hates to get. It depends. It's up to you to decide that for yourself. That could be a good thing, it could be a bad thing, but you get to decide. And as I was doing research for this episode, I came across a formula from the Successful Investor of Ray Dalio, since apparently throughout this entire episode, the only people I could think of to research and try to dig into for success was investors. I don't get how that turned up, but I guess it just did. So, what is Ray Dalio's formula for a successful life? It's dreams plus reality plus determination equals a successful life. And I think that's an interesting way to put it, where you look at where you want to be, what you want to do, what you want, compare that to reality to say, where am I now? And what effort am I going to take to get there? That is what he decides, or that is his formula for living a successful life. And I think it's a very good and adaptable formula for most people. So what do I think? In my opinion, what do I consider to be living a successful life? Honestly, it's something I'm still trying to figure out. Is there some element of wealth or income that I want that I'd say, yeah, I think that I'm more successful if I have this than I didn't? Sure. Is the job that I do, the career that I have, does that play an impact into what I would consider being a successful life on my part? Absolutely. Does my status in my community matter to me to say, I want to be better in this community or I want to contribute to this community? Is that going to affect my measure of life? For sure. the accomplishments I have, the competencies that I gain, the skills, the talent, the relationships I have, the how much my personal potential have I achieved, all of this, looking at it, I think to myself, yeah, these are all aspects that contribute to creating my successful life. So really, it is up to you. You're going to have to decide what it means to live a successful life for yourself, and I wish you luck in that. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with a friend you think will like it, or share it on social media. With all that said, thanks for listening. I greatly appreciate it, and I'll talk to y'all later. Ciao.